On June 10, 2007, Made in America, the final episode of The Sopranos aired. While nothing, no movie, no book, no video game, no television show is perfect, with the completion of The Sopranos, I knew we had come as close to perfect as can possibly be imagined. Nothing would ever top it. I was wrong. Just over 7 months later, the pilot episode of Breaking Bad hit the air. And I had no damn idea about it. I couldn't have even told you that AMC did original programming. The first season aired, then the second, then the third. And for whatever reason, I had not even been slightly attuned to what was happening. It may have been the circumstances in my life at the time, I suppose, but it wasn't until early to mid 2011 that I first heard of Breaking Bad. And that was only because I was now watching Mad Men, which happened to air on the same channel. I wasn't sure I'd be interested, but I received enough recommendations that I thought I'd give it a try. I watched the first episode. Then I immediately watched the second. Within 4 days, I watched all 33 episodes of the first 3 seasons. Hell, I think I even called in sick to work so I could keep watching. I was enthralled. And I thought by the time it was done, it had a legitimate chance to beat out The Sopranos. And as great as The Sopranos is, it did that, and then some. With Breaking Bad came a sequel movie, El Camino, and a prequel series, Better Call Saul. I love both of these tremendously, and while they may fall a step or two short of Breaking Bad, that is nothing to sneeze at. Under the creative direction of the one and only, a god among men, Vince Gilligan, these 3 entities comprise the Gilliverse. I will be using this term in this context throughout the video, and I will also use it at times in reference to the fanbase. The Gilliverse has so many avenues for exploration, but today we're going to focus on the characters, more specifically, my favorite characters. This is a subjective list, of course, but I'm looking for the majority of my analysis to be more objective. I hope to succeed in this regard. We went with a list of 100 characters in order to give a little spotlight to characters that don't generally get that spotlight. The crux of this list really begins at around number 30. You will see that character entries grow in length the deeper we get into the list. 2 different entries have 2 characters in them, as it was not possible to extricate them from each other and rank them separately. So with a little bit of cheating, a full 102 characters are represented here. The character page will look like this. The character's ranking will be listed here. The character's name will go here. The actor, or in some cases the actors, will go here. The number of episodes where the character appears in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, along with if they appeared in El Camino, will go here. And any associated imagery will go here. Now that you've gotten this far and are ready to see the countdown, I would like to take a moment to please ask that you hit that subscribe button down below. This channel delves into aspects of both the entertainment and sports worlds with the goal of bringing a unique perspective to every topic. If you want to wait and watch the rest of the video before liking and commenting, I'm completely on board with that. But if you do indeed like it, I kindly ask that you hit that thumbs up button. It means the world, YouTube algorithm and all. Thank you so very much, and without further ado, we are on to the countdown. I hope you enjoy it. The lone bright spot for Jimmy while at Davison, Maine, Jimmy and Omar genuinely cared for each other. Omar went the extra mile for Jimmy multiple times. The human face of the innocents that were slaughtered at Lalo's hacienda, Yolanda carved out a small but exceedingly meaningful part, punished only for being friends with a cartel kingpin. A quiet yet deadly associate of Gus Fring, Tyrus could be counted on for his unending loyalty. That he died at Fring's side is only appropriate. A member of Mike and Stacy's support group, and teased as a possible love interest for Mike, Anita is to Mike as Omar is to Jimmy, as Mike's only bright spot in therapy. One of Tuco's lieutenants, Nodos is best known for his propensity to speak out of turn. This gets him a beating from Tuco in front of Walt and Jesse, sadly getting himself killed. Brought in by Gus from Johns Hopkins University to be Hector's personal doctor, Maureen Bruckner immediately impresses by treating Marco and Lionel as normal people, instead of being terrified by them like, well, everybody else is. A fellow cop with Mike in Philadelphia, Detective Sanders offers a contrast to Detective Abbasi during Mike's interrogation, instilling a sense of compassion and crystallizing Mike's overall state of mind for the audience. The owner of Day Spa and Nail and Jimmy's landlord throughout much of Better Call Saul, Mrs. Wynn comically dislikes Jimmy and is quick to slam him for his various shortcomings before eventually evicting him. Senior counsel for Mesa Verde and Kevin Wachtel, Paige's introduction into the story as Kim's friend from law school opened a new career path for Kim, while giving the audience a reaction avatar of sorts toward Chuck. Formerly the ASAC of the Albuquerque DEA office and boss to Hank Schrader, George Merkert is swindled by the public face of Gustavo Fring and is unable to come to terms on his true persona until it is too late. A lieutenant of Hector Salamanca, Arturo got a little too big for his britches once the boss went down with a stroke, and his power play with Fring's side of the operation doesn't go well for him. An employee of Travel Wire, poor Fred was in the wrong place at the wrong time after going above and beyond to help Mike, but rightfully distrusting the motives of Lalo. An associate for Davis and Maine, Erin's no-nonsense, by-the-book attitude places her in immediate contrast with Jimmy, especially after it becomes clear that she has been assigned as his professional caretaker. Equally adept at the enforcement and negotiation sides of the cartel business, Gaff is Mike's counterpart for Don Eladio, and is personally handled by Mike during the massacre at Don Eladio's hacienda. As his name would suggest, the group leader was the group leader as part of Jesse's rehab. His questionable tactics are called out by Jesse once Jesse reveals that he was using the group as a customer base. The no-nonsense, highly capable Assistant District Attorney of Bernalillo County, Suzanne comes into common conflict with Jimmy, but seems to have a soft spot for Kim, as seen through her off-the-record phone call to her in the Better Call Saul finale. The innocent son of Andrea Cantillo and nephew of Tomas Cantillo, Brock becomes the ultimate flashpoint for Jesse's disillusionment over Walter, especially after discovering it was Walter that poisoned the poor kid. The partially estranged wife of Howard Hamlin, Cheryl is nonetheless devastated by Howard's sudden death, which she only later finds out was murder instead of suicide. Her distrust for Kim and Jimmy mirrors the shifting attitude of the audience toward the two. Badger's cousin and the owner of a storage and tow yard, Clovis is Jesse's temporary antagonist during Jesse's Season 2 Nadir. He's immediately made submissive in Walter's presence, and he introduces us to Old Joe. As part of Jimmy's film crew, the sound guy, later revealed to be named Phil, offers a degree of comedic relief throughout Better Call Saul, especially in his role as a stand-in for Rand Casimiro during Kim and Jimmy's grift of Howard Hamlin. An associate of Hank Schrader while working for the Albuquerque Police Department, Detective Roberts is essential in investigating Walter White's disappearance, Gail Bedeker's murder, and in the capture and arrest of Lalo Salamanca. A lieutenant of Gus Fring, Victor offers loyalty to such a fault that he allows himself to be spotted at Gail's crime scene and oversteps his bounds in an attempt to replace Walter and Jesse, leading to his grisly end. Initially appearing to be highly sinister, Jeff enters the game as Saul/Gene's submissive subordinate, executing mall heists and using his cab to transport and drug identity theft marks. After being mentioned several times as Werner Ziegler's wife and then widow, Margaret is tracked down by Lalo during his attempt to discover the truth behind Werner and Gus's activities, The tension surrounding her safety with Lalo in her house is remarkable for a character with such little screen time. A skilled member of Werner Ziegler's construction crew, Casper's loyalty to Werner shines through when he tells Mike that Werner was worth 50 of him. He provided Lalo with information regarding the super lab at Axe Point, I guess, where he presumably meets his doom. An obnoxious, overly confident stockbroker, and apparently a license to print money, Ken, also known to some as Ken Wins, is the first victim of the alter egos Victor and Giselle, and he really gets a good from Walter after screwing him over while not even recognizing his existence, a microcosm of what Walt's life had been up to that point. A cartel member turned DEA informant, the aptly named Slow-Moving Tortuga, is Hank Schrader's introduction into the cartel side of things in the overall DEA operation. He meets perhaps the most unique of all the deaths in the Gilliverse. Another of Tuco's lieutenants, as well as his bodyguard, Gonzo shows a certain amount of compassion over No-Dose's death, which led to his own unfortunate yet misunderstood demise, leading Tuco to believe that Gonzo has become an informant. An El Camino exclusive character, Neil Candy is that movie's antagonist, and is shown through flashbacks to have welded Jesse's mobile captivity device. While Jesse was not being greedy, Neil simply couldn't help himself, leading to his completely avoidable downfall. A mailroom employee at HHM, and later the overrun personal assistant to Chuck McGill, Ernesto, also known as Ernie, displays an admirable loyalty to his mailroom alums Kim and Jimmy, while occasionally stumbling through some charming cluelessness. He also appears to be a big Bonnie Tyler fan. The friend and later co-accomplice of Jeff and their schemes with Gene/Saul, Buddy's reluctance to rip off someone with cancer got the ball rolling on what would eventually and finally lead to Saul's capture and incarceration. First the assistant principal and later principal at J.P. Wynn High School, where Walter works as a teacher and where Walter Jr. attends. Carmen is sympathetic to Walt's plight, but doesn't allow for that sympathy to contrast with her foremost purpose of leading the school and doing what's best for its students. Arguably the most tragic character in all the Gilliverse, the only named character to die without even the tiniest hint of culpability. Drew Sharp represents the breaking point, not only for Jesse, but even the hardened Mike. It truly showed the audience what kind of monster Todd Alquist really is. One of Jimmy's early elder law clients and the star of his first commercial, Mrs. Strauss represents Jimmy's noble side, demonstrated by her off-screen death and Jimmy's easy recollection of the specific regulations in her will, a highly overlooked pit stop on the road of transformation from Jimmy McGill to Saul Goodman. The squeaky clean CEO of Mesa Verde Bank and Trust, Kevin Wachtel, through Paige Novick, gave Kim the out she needed at HHM, but he also jump-started her disillusionment with corporate law, made for an amusing mini-antagonist for Jimmy toward the end of Better Call Saul. Walter White's initial partner and co-founder in Gray Matter Technologies, which went on to become a billion-dollar company, Elliot could have ended Breaking Bad before it ever really happened, by offering Walt an alternative way to pay for his medical expenses. He easily capitulates to Walt's plan to filter his illicit drug money to Walter Jr. The head of Jimmy's film crew, Marshall Dixon, also known as Joey Dixon, is a professionally self-absorbed film student who likely views himself as among the great auteurs of his time. He does prove himself invaluable to Jimmy's overall operation, from Jimmy's fake savior moment at the billboard, through the Rand Casimiro scam, and everything in between. A dedicated and steadfast employee of Gus Fring, Cynthia, the manager of the Albuquerque Los Pollos Hermanos location during the Breaking Bad days, is not only unwittingly Walter's entrance into the larger drug world, but also, perhaps again unwittingly, is willing to stand up to the fearsome Salamanca cousins, a great addition to any payroll. Also a dedicated and steadfast employee of Gus Fring, Lyle, the assistant manager of the Albuquerque Los Pollos Hermanos location during the Better Call Saul days, has the gumption to stand up to Hector Salamanca and goes as far as to offer Gus further assistance after Hector and his crew hold him and the Pollo staff hostage, a seemingly ideal employee. A neophyte in the criminal world, Daniel Wormold, also known by his alias Price, is a sucker for his baseball card collection, to the point that he almost attunes the police to his illegal activities, provided the necessary means for Nacho to put Hector into his crippled state. And apparently, he is the Danny of the laser tag place referenced by Saul Goodman during Breaking Bad. Gustavo Fring's personal doctor and the operator of a free clinic, Dr. Barry Goodman seems to be more involved in the criminal underworld than anticipated, based on his assessment of Hector Salamanca's fate. Not afraid to step outside the bounds of legality, he is nonetheless a dedicated doctor who puts his patients first. He even gets around to treating Mike's gunshot wound after taking care of Gus. The cantankerous homeowner who refuses to budge from his residence as a result of Mesa Verde's expansion, Everett Acker's disposition lights a fire under Kim that leads to her decision to leave corporate law. He shares many memorable and hilarious scenes with Jimmy as part of their partnership. The leader of a neo-Nazi gang and Walter White's final antagonist, Jack Welker, uncle to Todd Alquist, came into Walter White's web as the mastermind of the precision, calculated series of prison murders to disassociate Walter and Lydia from any connection to Gus Fring's drug empire. Jack is cold and remorseless, but he does leave Walter a portion of the $80 million that he stole from him. The crestfallen and ill-fated father to Jane Margolis, Donald Margolis is an air traffic controller and the owner of the apartment building that Jane manages and that Jesse lives in. After bottling up his emotions following the overdose death of his daughter, Donald returns to work at air traffic control, but in his grief, he inadvertently causes the mid-air collision of two planes. He would later attempt suicide, but his ultimate fate, while certainly not good, remains unknown. Skylar White's divorce attorney and unofficial therapist, Pamela Orbick is the first person outside of Walter's family and immediate associates to know that Walter has entered the drug business. The no-nonsense, yet completely sensible advice she offered Skylar would have precluded her from a vast majority of the trauma she would eventually undergo, advice that Skylar chose not to follow. The owner of Golden Moth Chemical and a high-level associate of Gus Fring, Dwayne Chow, often referred to as just Chow, is a target of both the cartel and the DEA. He is used to try to trap Mike and is subsequently murdered, but the trap itself failed. Despite limited appearances, Chow provided a combination of comic relief and sobering reality. The final member of Jimmy McGill's film crew, Drama Girl, later revealed to be named Sherry, provided hair and makeup for Jimmy's various productions. She also proved invaluable as an actress, appearing in one of those commercials and impersonating news reporters and Louisiana-based church parishioners. Unlike her cohorts, she appears to actually care for Jimmy and offers to return his payment to him when he is struggling financially. An underground low-level arms dealer, Lawson is nonetheless able to maintain a professional and courteous manner about him. While he is undertaking illegal activities, he will offer advice that best suits that of his client over what would benefit himself most, a firm believer in the right to protect oneself against bodily harm from others. A top-level oncologist outside the network of Walter White's medical plan, Dr. Del Cavoli nonetheless becomes Walter's doctor during his cancer treatment through his surgery. On top of being an amazing doctor who guided Walt through what had appeared to be an impossible recovery, Dr. Del Cavoli demonstrates care for the White family as individuals. He delivers the news that Walter's cancer has gone into remission, equally thrilling his family and appalling him. Despite only appearing in a single scene in a single episode, and in a flashback at that, Max's presence is subsequently felt over the entire Gilliverse timeline. A chemist and business partner to Gus Fring, and by every account also his romantic partner, Max is murdered by Hector on orders of Don Eladio, setting into motion a 20-year plan, whereas Gus became a cartel associate before exacting his revenge on just about every last one of them. Breaking Bad's first antagonist and Walter White's first direct kill, Crazy 8, real name Domingo Molina, starts off as a street-level dealer in the Salamanca Albuquerque operation, before moving all the way up to distributor. Throughout this time, he is the personal DEA informant for Hank Schrader through a deal made with Saul Goodman, cousin to Emilio Koyama and a childhood friend to Nacho Varga. The head of the Mexican cartel, Don Eladio can come across as childlike and borderline innocent in a variety of situations, but he should never be mistaken for anything short of a cold-blooded, ruthless killer willing to do anything to line his pockets. Orders the killing of Max and several of Gus's operatives in order to get his hands on the Blue Sky formula. A senior name partner at the Davis & Main law firm, Clifford Main is highly amenable toward Jimmy working there and does everything he can to make it work, but he sees the writing on the wall once Jimmy does an end-around on him in releasing a Sandpiper commercial without his or his partner's approval. Made into a pawn during Kim and Jimmy's long-term grift against Howard Hamlin, he is a professional lawyer dedicated to his cause through and through. Appearing in just one episode, Christy Esposito nonetheless encapsulates Jimmy McGill's entire life and career. Overlooked and branded for life over a single mistake that helped define herself in a positive manner going forward, Christy leaves open the possibility that a path similar to the one Jimmy eventually took may be unavoidable. A senior and named partner at the law firm Schweikert & Coakley, Rich at first appears as though he would be an antagonist to Jimmy as the counsel for Sandpiper Crossing. This proves not to be the case, as he eventually becomes not just an employer, but a mentor of sorts for Kim. He has proven skills, not just as a lawyer, but as a leader, and he is left stunned when Kim left him. He respects his peers and is genuinely hurt by Howard Hamlin's death, despite being his legal adversary. A low-level drug manufacturer and distributor, Emilio is Jesse's friend from elementary school and his partner in the drug trade. As a result of a tip from his cousin Crazy 8, Emilio was arrested in a raid that Jesse is able to avoid. His insistence on being represented by Saul Goodman attunes Jesse and subsequently Walt to his services. With a steely demeanor and a tough guy attitude, Emilio is not to be trifled with. Street tough drug dealers who never uttered a sound across 3 appearances, the unnamed rival dealers carry a massive presence and play a pivotal role in the story. They are responsible for the death of Combo, killed by Tomas Cantillo on their orders. As employees of Gus Fring, their use of children enrages Jesse, and their subsequent murder of Tomas prompts Jesse into action. The first individuals killed by Walter in cold blood as a means to protect Jesse. First mentioned in Breaking Bad and appearing one time very briefly, Stacey Ehrmantraut takes on a prominent role in Better Call Saul as Matt Ehrmantraut's widow, Mike Ehrmantraut's daughter-in-law, and Kaylee Ehrmantraut's mother. Stacey and Kaylee represent Mike's innocence, his muse, the reasons he does the things that he does. Oblivious, at least on the surface, to Mike's nefarious activities, she successfully engages as his moral compass and emotional support. A pickpocket extraordinaire who's best not put into tight spaces, Huell is an associate of and later security for Saul Goodman. Huell attempts to find the rationale for Saul and Kim's shenanigans, but in time he falls in line and does the dirty work for his boss. He provides the information necessary for Hank to discover the location of Walt's ill-gotten money, which inadvertently leads to Hank and Stephen Gomez's deaths. A resident of Sandpiper Crossing and an early elder client of Jimmy McGill, Jimmy discovers Sandpiper's nefarious activities through Irene Landry's financial records. Irene subsequently becomes the class representative in the lawsuit brought against Sandpiper. After being a steadfast defender of Jimmy, she comes to resent him in light of his attempted manipulations. Delightful and charming, Irene provides the one moment of levity during Howard's breakdown at the mediation hearing. A prosecutor turned defense lawyer, Bill Oakley goes from being a courtroom rival of Jimmy McGill to being envious of Jimmy's entry into private practice, to once again his rival, and then to his advisory council. Oakley represents the down-in-the-dumps, underpaid, and underappreciated prosecutor who has eschewed the glamorous and prestigious side of the law, and he does so with alacrity. And those bus bench ads, huh? Wonder where he got that idea from. The wife of Elliot Schwartz, and with him the co-owner of Gray Matter Technologies, Gretchen was once Walter White's lab assistant and romantic interest. It was the dissolvement of that relationship which led to the dissolvement of Walter and Elliot's partnership, resulting in Elliot and Gretchen becoming massively wealthy while Walter became a high school teacher. Gretchen still cares about Walter in the sense that she wants him to beat his cancer, but rightfully resents being party to his lies about how he is paying for his treatment. This ends their association. Given these events, she does not easily capitulate to Walter's plan to filter his illicit drug money to Walter Jr. Perhaps the most sympathetic and consequently the most empathetic character in the Gilliverse, Manuel Papa Varga owns A to Z Fine Upholstery and is Nacho Varga's father. Completely separate from the drug business, he remains aware of Nacho's involvement within it. When Hector Salamanca proposes using Manuel's business as a front for a substantial financial windfall, Manuel still rejects not only the offer, but Hector himself. Nacho's insistence that his father not only be kept out of the business, but also to be kept safe, is the sole motivating factor that leads to Nacho's death. Manuel's final scene with Mike demonstrates his overall qualities as a good man with a good heart. Portrayed by absolute powerhouse and all-time entertainment legend Carol Burnett, the first impression we get of Marion is of a crotchety, stubborn old woman. As Jeff's mother and later a friend to Gene/Saul, we do get to see a softer side to her. She is a concerned mother who only wants what's best for her son, and she thinks that Gene is just the right kind of influence that Jeff needs. Her suspicion over Gene begins to grow though, and she soon discovers that he is really Saul Goodman. And while under the threat of strangulation, Marion boldly and bravely stands up to Gene, heartbreakingly telling him that she trusted him before exposing him. A drug dealer, friend, and associate of Jesse Pinkman, Combo, real name Christian Ortega, is murdered by Tomas Cantillo on orders of the rival dealers on account of Walter White's desire to push into territory that isn't his. Although he is involved in illegal activities, Combo is shown to be a trustworthy individual and an exceptional and loyal friend to Jesse. Combo secures the RV that Jesse and Walt used to begin their drug operation at a substantially lower price than he could have commanded. His death shakes up and effectively ends the Pinkman crew, and opens the door to Walter White finding Gustavo Fring. A co-founder and high-level capo of the Mexican cartel, Juan Bolsa is ostensibly the cartel's consigliere, serving as Gustavo Fring's direct superior and as an intermediary in the otherwise complicated relationship between Gus and the cartel, specifically with the boss Don Eladio. Although refined in manner and pragmatic in approach, Bolsa should not be underestimated. He won't get his own hands dirty, but his ruthlessness knows no bounds. He orders the brutal killing of Tortuga, and is perfectly fine with letting Nacho Varga be tortured in unspeakable ways if he didn't provide Bolsa the information he needed and wanted. He is a complicated man with uncomplicated goals. Formerly an employee of the DMV, or the MDV, Francesca came into the employ of Kim and Jimmy as a secretary for Wexler McGill. Although closer to Kim, she eventually becomes Saul's secretary as he begins his own criminal law practice. Outside of Walter White, Francesca sees perhaps the most dramatic character transformation in the entire Gilliverse, going from a kind, well-meaning, enthusiastic, plucky go-getter to a dreary, morose pessimist, run down by her association with Saul and thoroughly apathetic toward the needs of others. She did get a truly badass moment though when she told off Walter, by now in full Heisenberg mode, and extorted him, becoming the only person to ever get one over on Walt without ever being dealt a receipt. A henchman and associate of Saul Goodman, Patrick Kuby proves himself invaluable toward maintaining Walter's drug empire. From posing as a city worker to induce Bogdan into selling his car wash, to facilitating and prolonging the train heist, to gathering Walter's ill-gotten gains with Huell, Kuby is a man who wears many hats. Of course, it's that scene with Huell in the storage unit, in front of $80 million of cold hard cash, that may have been the funniest in all of Breaking Bad, if not the entire Gilliverse altogether. While his ultimate fate is unknown, it can reasonably be assumed that he got away from everything scot-free, which would certainly make him a rarity. His comedic chops and reliability as a criminal left a long-lasting impression. High-strung, neurotic, and at times divorced from reality, Betsy Kettleman is married to Craig Kettleman, the one-time treasurer of Bernalillo County. While Craig was charged and convicted with embezzlement of county funds, it is without question that Betsy was the driving force behind all of his activities. Betsy continues her illegal activities after Craig serves his sentence by ripping off mostly elderly clients at her new business, Sweet Liberty Tax Services. Betsy tells Jimmy that he is the kind of lawyer that guilty people hire, perhaps marking the starting point of his descent into Saul Goodman. While having her husband under her thumb, she is not immune to being put in her place, as is done by Jimmy early on, and then emphatically by Kim. A high-ranking executive as the head of logistics at Madrigal Electromotive, Lydia is an indispensable member of Gus Fring's drug empire. That said, her inclusion within this hierarchy serves as an excellent contrast to the cold-blooded killers that generally inhabit such positions. Lydia is ill-equipped to do anything more than handle the undercover movement of materials, and while she is aware of the violence and bloodshed that exists in the drug world, and is at times all too happy to suggest it, she certainly won't partake in it herself, or even bear witness to it after the fact. The proverbial square peg in a round hole, she is the catalyst for the train heist, and her name is the last spoken word of dialogue in the entire Breaking Bad series. A doggedly determined DEA agent, and later ASAC of the Albuquerque DEA field office, Hank Schrader is often characterized as the true hero of Breaking Bad. And while his job includes chasing after and catching people engaged in illegal activities, it remains questionable whether he is a true hero. Hank is married to Marie while Walt is married to Skyler. As Marie and Skyler are sisters, that makes Hank Walter's brother-in-law, creating a cat-and-mouse game lasting almost the entirety of the series that pits the brothers-in-law against one another, unbeknownst to Hank. While he has proven his effectiveness as a DEA agent, Hank only finds out about Walt's involvement by accident, although he is able to put the pieces together after the fact for complete confirmation. His dedication to catching Walt at any cost leads to his complete disregard for Jesse's safety, willing to sacrifice his life in order to potentially catch Walt in the act of murder. His character is layered and complex, leaving audiences unsure of whether to root for him or for Walter. All that said, his ignominious death at the hands of Jack Welker leaves Walter and the audience with a hollow feeling of remorse for what could have been and probably should have been. The firstborn, and at the time of the first episode, only child of Walter and Skylar White, Walter Jr., or also just Jr., has had his difficulties in life. He was born with cerebral palsy, resulting in a stuttering speech pattern and an inability to walk without crutches. He goes through the typical struggles of a teenager, getting busted for attempting to buy beer and undergoing a bit of an identity crisis, preferring for a time to be called Flynn instead of Walter or Jr. The marital problems between his parents leave him stuck in the middle, and without knowledge of precisely what is causing those problems, he sees his mother as in the wrong and virulently takes his father's side. For what it's worth, he and later his baby sister Holly serve as Walter's moral compass. He spearheads the Save Walter White campaign and is falsely led to believe that it was a success, when in reality it was Saul who was laundering Walt's drug money into the fundraiser. He has perhaps the most touching moment in the entire series, while in the midst of an otherwise unholy cauldron, as he summons whatever strength he has in his compromised body and throws his father off of his mother, providing her protection while his father holds a knife in his bloody hands. It is he who calls the police on his father and puts a final end to the Heisenberg Empire. A cloak of innocence over a warped reality, Walter White Jr. offers the audience a glimpse into this world through his eyes, only for that to be torn away, similar to how it was for him. A tattoo artist without any tattoos of her own, an apartment building manager, and a recovering addict, Jane Margolis is Jesse Pinkman's first on-screen love interest. Their relationship starts innocently enough, with Jane at first unwilling to rent an apartment to Jesse due to his inability to provide a legal means of income. But she relents, and in time, they find themselves drawn together. Jane's father is Donald Margolis, the owner of the building. He is committed almost to an overbearing degree to keep Jane on top of her rehab for fear of her relapsing. Unfortunately, events conspire to the point that she does relapse, bringing Jesse down with her. However, they both desire to get clean, and after Jesse reveals his illegal activities to Jane, and specifically Walter White's involvement, she sees a way out for both of them. She blackmails Walt, and it works, but they decide to get high one last time before running off with Jesse's money. When Walt comes back to the apartment, he accidentally knocks Jane over to her back. When she starts to asphyxiate, Walt initially moves to save her, but then he stops and allows her to die. He later annihilates Jesse with this information, leaving him broken. Jane returns in a flashback to Jesse in El Camino as he drives away into the Alaskan wilderness, reminding him that he is in control of his own destiny. While not wholly innocent in her own right, Jane received an undeserved sentence, and her death was likely the final domino to fall in Walter's transition into Heisenberg. The disgraced former treasurer of Bernalillo County, Craig Kettleman is equal parts criminal mastermind and utter buffoon. His congenial nature and innate happiness is often overrun by his wife Betsy's intolerance for such things, often played out to comedic results. He embezzles $1.6 million in funds from the county, likely at his wife's behest, and when it becomes crystal clear that there is no way out of the situation that doesn't involve him spending time in prison, he brings Betsy to terms over their situation, finally resulting in her acceptance of their reality. After his release, the Kettlemans receive a visit from Jimmy at their new business, Sweet Liberty Tax Services, which doubles as a scheme to rip off their mostly elderly customer base. While Betsy is furious with Jimmy and wants to see him gone, Craig is delighted to see him, even offering a mazel tov upon hearing that he married that, quote, horrible woman with the ponytail, unquote. A tool, and at times even a useful tool of his wife, Craig is beholden to her with little agency of his own, yet he still shines through given our empathy for him and his unending, interminable zest for all things life. Like hellfire falling from the skies above, Marco and Lionel Salamanca, also simply known as the Cousins, are what a laboratory would spit out when attempting to concoct the deadliest type of assassins. Learning their lessons at a very young age from their Uncle Hector, the Cousins are remorseless machines, killing without blinking while marching through all necessary paths like Terminators. Despite saying very little, their actions and their collective demeanor speak volumes more than anyone can imagine. Despite the lack of humanity that permeates the Salamanca clan, Marco and Lionel still take it to the next level, so much so that it's easy to forget that they're actual humans who can be killed. Thus, when that does happen during their shootout with Hank, which is, along with the shootout in Bagman, the most physically intense in the entire Gilliverse, it comes as quite the shock. It's telling that in Marco's one moment of weakness, wherein he doesn't kill without blinking and takes the time to actually enjoy himself, he is himself killed. The mantra the Salamancas live by, La Familia es todo, was the Cousins' undoing, for in their attempt to avenge the death of Tuco, one of their own, they couldn't see the forest for the trees. There are many characters in the Gilliverse that one would not want to be on the wrong side of. Perhaps none fit this bill quite like Marco and Lionel. A drug dealer, friend, and associate of Jesse Pinkman, Brandon Badger Mayhew is introduced to us as a sign-twirling marketing tool of a realty company. Despite being on probation, Badger is drawn into the drug business by Jesse, as Jesse attempts to replicate Walter's product while he and Walter are on the outs. Badger is useful in his ability to get pseudo, but when Jesse is dissatisfied with various batches and subsequently dumps them, he and Jesse have a falling out, with Jesse abandoning Badger in the desert. They reconcile, and Badger becomes a willing participant in Walter and Jesse's new operation. In doing so, he gets arrested while trying to sell to an undercover cop, resulting in the introduction of Saul Goodman as Walter and Jesse's lawyer. Badger lays low after this, then begrudgingly agrees to Jesse's plan to sell on the side in rehab. However, Badger takes to the rehab and tries to get clean. This does not last long, and after a relapse, we learn that he is an avid sci-fi fan, especially Star Trek. He and Skinny Pete are both paid handsomely by Walter White for posing as hitmen, but then turn around and give that money to Jesse after he escapes Jack Welker's compound. Badger is instrumental in helping Jesse escape by driving Skinny Pete's car to the Mexican border under the ruse that it was Jesse driving it. Badger is certainly around for comic relief, and he provides that in spades, but his friendship with Jesse, Skinny Pete, and Combo brings out the special bonds that tie people together, wherein despite the surrounding circumstances, one would do anything to help the other. Jesse's family by blood resented and eventually disowned him. His family by choice, his real family, loves him unconditionally. Badger never fails in this regard. A criminal with a good heart who was never like the bad people he fell in with, not really, Nacho Varga was an associate of the Salamanca crime family, specifically a lieutenant for Tuco and Hector Salamanca. While his motivations for being involved in criminal life remain unexplained, it's clear that he was solely in it for the money. Now, Nacho was no saint, and any attempt to make him one undermines the complexity of his character. He willingly engages in side deals outside of Tuco's jurisdiction, he is willing to rip off the Kettlemans. He does rip off Daniel Wormold, and whether or not his reasons were noble, he attempted to execute both Tuco and Hector. However, with all this in mind, nothing trumps the love and need for protection Nacho has for his father Manuel. Nacho goes to unspeakable lengths, indeed right to the very possible end of the rope, in order to ensure his father's safety. Knowing that it was over for him, he took matters into his own hands and ended his own life, stripping the satisfaction away from the Salamancas, who would have gleefully done the deed themselves. This literal sacrifice doesn't completely redeem the choices he made in his life, but it does make him different from the others around him, and it does atone for the danger he placed his father in. The path he was going on was never going to end well for him, but at least he assured his father wouldn't be dragged down with him, a silver lining of morality, if you will. Seemingly too uptight for smug and proper society, Howard Hamlin is a senior partner and the second H of the HHM law firm. Initially viewed as an antagonist for Jimmy, with Jimmy going so far as to call him Lord Vader, it is soon revealed that Howard is merely a pawn in what is actually Chuck's vendetta against Jimmy. This begins a period of détente between them, and between Howard and Kim, but it's always been a bit uneasy between them. Jimmy leads Howard to believe that Howard is, at the very least, indirectly responsible for Chuck's death, sending Howard into a temporary cycle of remorse, regret, and depression. However, seemingly at the cost of his marriage, Howard is able to push through and return to his normal self with a fresh outlook on life. Kim and Jimmy's resentment toward Howard never left them though, and as he held the key to the Sandpiper settlement, which in turn would create a massive financial windfall for Kim and Jimmy, Howard becomes the focus of a long-play scheme to undermine his credibility and potentially ruin him personally to force said settlement. And the plan works, a little too well, as Howard is literally caught in the crossfire, murdered without the batting of an eye by Lalo for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, berating his tormentors. Perhaps no character walked the line like Howard did, equally capable of drawing disgust or delight from viewers. The manner of his death, though, was universally despised, and marked the end of the legal side of the Better Call Saul series. Far from a perfect man, he undoubtedly deserved so much more. A short-lived yet highly impactful character, Werner Ziegler was the head of the construction project underneath Lavanderia Brillante that would eventually turn into the superlab used by Walter and Jesse in Breaking Bad. A German national, Werner left his home and his wife to conduct this difficult, long-term project under the veil of secrecy. He earned the job by being forthright and honest about the complexities involved in executing it, especially given these specific circumstances. This immediately established Werner as an upright individual who valued integrity over the ability to swindle his way into a lucrative payday. This, in turn, allowed him to connect with Mike, and the two became fast friends beyond the simple fact that they were associates. The project wore on much longer than had been anticipated, and in that process, Werner grew increasingly homesick. Despite warnings to the contrary, he escaped the compound and was to meet up with his wife for a few days before purporting to return. This did not work out, as Mike was able to hunt him down, but not before Werner accidentally spilled a sliver of information to Lalo. In an attempt to save his wife, Werner broke all of our hearts by using his final words to her to scream at her, demanding she return to Germany and that he didn't want to see her. Our hearts were broken again when Mike, whom Werner always called Michael, his one true friend in Albuquerque, was forced to execute him for what was essentially treason against Gus. Werner stands out as someone doing what he loved, just perhaps for the wrong people and for the wrong purposes. In that sense, he is innocent and is worthy of sympathy. A recovering addict and doting mother to Brock Cantillo, Andrea Cantillo is Jesse Pinkman's second on-screen love interest and his longest-lasting one. Meeting Jesse in rehab, Jesse at first uses Andrea as an example to Badger and Skinny Pete of how to sell their drugs under such circumstances. Upon learning that she has a son, Jesse relents from selling to her, and instead they develop a relationship. Jesse immediately bonds with Brock as well, creating an opportunity for the three of them to actually become a family. Things fall apart after Jesse learns it was Andrea's younger brother Tomas who killed Combo under orders from the rival dealers. When Tomas is killed, devastating Andrea, Jesse seeks his revenge. In time, they resume their relationship, but through Walter's manipulation, Jesse ends things with her under the guise of protecting her. However, he still takes care of her financially from afar, attempting to assure that she and Brock can live a good life away from the violence and bloodshed that had always enveloped them. In the name of doing what's best for Brock, Andrea accepts all of this and proves that she would indeed do anything to prevent her son from falling into the same path that Tomas did. Sadly, things end terribly for Andrea. When Jesse attempts to escape Jack Walker's compound, they drive him to Andrea's house and make him watch as Todd manipulates Andrea out of the house and casually shoots her in the back of the head, dropping her dead to Jesse's and our absolute horror. In a show where hundreds are killed in a plane crash, a teenage boy is shot to death, and several other innocents die for no apparent reason, Andrea's death is likely the most heartbreaking of them all, especially considering that with her death, the axe now swings over Brock's head. The last of Jesse Pinkman's inner circle of close friends, Skinny Pete is a drug dealer and drug user who has spent time in prison. One of his blockmates was Tuco Salamanca, which provides his introduction into Walter and Jesse's lives. Skinny is part of Jesse's crew in the period of time between their work with Tuco and Gus, and during a transaction with Spooge, he is deftly maneuvered into a situation where he is robbed. Spooked by Combo's death, and wary of the fact that he is still on probation, Skinny leaves Jesse's crew, but he never leaves Jesse. Along with Badger, he is drawn into the business again under the guise of attending rehab to sell to others in rehab, but again, along with Badger, he takes to the rehab in an honest attempt to get better control of his life. However, this is only temporary, and soon enough he is back to using. In an interesting development, while shopping for roadie cases, Skinny demonstrates prodigious talent on the piano, speaking to his greatly wasted life potential, as he was likely considered by everyone around him to be nothing more than a druggy burnout. He and Badger are both paid handsomely by Walter White for posing as hitmen, but then turn around and give that money to Jesse. Skinny Pete then concocts the plan that helps Jesse evade the police and ultimately escape by keeping the El Camino that Jesse took from Todd and having Jesse take Badger's car to avoid detection. To additionally avoid detection, Skinny gives Jesse his beanie. When Jesse inquires as to why Skinny is doing all of this for him, Skinny earnestly tells Jesse that he is his hero. Like Badger, Skinny Pete is around for comic relief, which he certainly provides. And at the expense of repeating myself, his relationship with Jesse, Skinny Pete, and Combo brings out the special bonds that tie people together. Jesse's family by blood resented and eventually disowned him, but his family by choice, his real family, loves him unconditionally. Skinny Pete not only never fails in this regard, but he is a beacon of light. An extremely talented lawyer, the co-founder and senior partner of the HHM law firm and older brother to Jimmy McGill, Chuck McGill is the centerpiece character of Jimmy's transformation into Saul Goodman. Despite his many talents, Chuck suffers from what he believes to be electromagnetic hypersensitivity, but in time it is revealed to be some kind of mental illness. This not only affects his day-to-day life, but it also affects Jimmy's, who appoints himself as Chuck's caretaker. Chuck serves as Jimmy's inspiration, prompting Jimmy to turn away from his con-man ways. Jimmy works in the mailroom at HHM while secretly studying law. In time, and in honor of Chuck, Jimmy does pass the bar and becomes a lawyer. While outwardly supportive of Jimmy, Chuck resents the fact that his ne'er-do-well brother is in the same profession as he is, a profession which he holds to be sacred. In fact, he refers to it as a chimp with a machine gun. This becomes the primary source of tension between the brothers up until Chuck's breakdown at Jimmy's bar hearing, and the resultant loss of his malpractice insurance causes Chuck to lose the battle with his demons. Allowing his house to catch fire, entombing himself within the walls, Chuck will pass away. Yet, even in death, Chuck's specter never leaves, placed around Jimmy's neck as an albatross of remembrance and regrets. Jimmy can never outrun Chuck's shadow, and everything Chuck ever said about Jimmy and his swindler's ways manifested into the creation of Saul Goodman. Like Howard Hamlin, Chuck towed a line of sympathy and disdain, with it unclear if it should be viewed as a villain, despite his obvious placement as an antagonist. Whatever the case may be, Chuck's character arc was executed to near perfection, buoyed by a tour de force performance by the one and only Michael McKean. After whispers of his existence and brief views of his car that looks like a pinto bean, Ed Galbraith, also known as Ed the Disappearer, finally shows up during the penultimate episode of Breaking Bad, bringing Saul Goodman to his place of business, Best Quality Vacuum, in order to change his identity and relocate him to a new life. At this point, he had already brought Walter White in for those same purposes. Now, Ed provides these services for a substantial fee, and although this remains unspoken, it would appear he also does this so that the person in question will have a better chance at a safe, meaningful life than he would in prison. There is no question that Ed is a hardliner. He takes Walter to a remote cabin in New Hampshire and lays down the law over their arrangement. When Jesse is able to provide $248,200 of the $250,000 necessary for his extraction, Ed denies him and is not moved one iota by Jesse's pleas as they relate to the outright torture he has recently undergone. Where most people would chalk up the missing $1,800 and call it a day, at that point it isn't about the money for Ed. He is a man of his word, and to him a deal is a deal. His only expectation is that anyone on the other side of his arrangements honor that same commitment. Yet, he still offers Jesse advice, and after calling the police on him, he provides a false description to allow Jesse a chance to escape and retrieve the necessary money to complete their transaction. So, while he won't budge on his standards, he does take the time to show compassion. And while he is unwilling to stay an extra hour in New Hampshire to play cards with Walter until Walter offers him $10,000, he is willing to hold on to a letter Jesse wishes to send to Brock for several weeks before mailing it while in Mexico, free of charge. While serving as a mere plot convenience for some, a deus ex machina of sorts, Ed is able to buck this convention through his characterization and development, which all takes place despite massively limited screen time. He is, in a sense, the one true hero of the Gilliverse. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do, and so does he. Born as James Morgan McGill, later legally changing his name to Gene Takovic, the man with the flashy suits will always be known to all as the one and only Saul Goodman. As Hank suffers from PTSD in connection with his killing Tuco Salamanca, he is unable to continue in his role as the show's comic relief, a role taken over by Saul. Rightfully seen by many as a clown, Saul specializes as a criminal lawyer who, despite appearances, is highly skilled and well known for getting his clients deals that would far exceed their expectations, if not exonerating them outright. It wasn't always like this for Saul, once known to all as Jimmy, a struggling public defender who stumbled into a class action lawsuit that set the stage for an ill-fated corporate career before beginning his solo practice. Saul's connection to Mike Ehrmantraut and the deeper criminal underworld, combined with his legal skills, make him an incredible force of nature. However, he doesn't lack for humanity, something seen as early as when he encourages Jesse to speak with Andrea and reconcile with her, rather than having him be their go-between. He loves his brother Chuck, and he loves and later marries Kim, and before his ultimate transformation into Saul Goodman, he often seeks out the right thing, and often goes about doing that, as seen in his returning of the retainer given to him by the Kettlemans, and reconciling Irene Landry with her friends at the expense of having to wait on his Sandpiper settlement payout. Seemingly always in conflict with himself, the living embodiment of the proverbial angel and devil on one's shoulders, Jimmy/Saul/Gene provided the viewers with countless memories, the last of which involved him finally settling comfortably within his own skin and accepting the responsibility for all his past nefarious actions. Thus, fittingly, the final shot we see of him is in a jumpsuit within the yards of a prison. The hub of Albuquerque's criminal underworld, veterinarian extraordinaire Dr. Caldera is your hookup for anything you might possibly need. He is first brought to our attention when Mike needs under-the-radar medical attention for a bullet wound. He then gets Mike a protection job for Daniel Wormold, which leads to bigger and better opportunities for Mike should he wish to pursue them. He is also well known to Nacho, as it is Nacho who specifically requests Mike to assist with taking out Tuco. He is also well known to the cousins, Marco and Leonel Salamanca, who bring a bullet-ridden Nacho to his office to basically perform emergency surgery on him. It is in this scene where Caldera graduates from great character to something bigger, when he leans down in Nacho's ear and in no uncertain terms tells him to GTFO and never return, taking all of his cartel, let's call them shenanigans, with him. Dr. Caldera carries with him a great sense of charm, as demonstrated in his explanation to Jimmy about how not to try and differentiate between male and female fish. To top everything off, Caldera is a highly dedicated veterinarian who, at least on a professional level, loves nothing more than treating the animals brought into his care and making sure they continue to receive the care they need once they leave his office. Over time, Caldera decides that this love for animals supersedes whatever financial benefit he may receive from being the criminal underground's connective tissue. He sells his little black book of operatives to Jimmy, and it is heavily implied that he employs the services of Ed so that he may focus solely on being a veterinarian. Despite his limited appearances, or maybe because of them, Caldera was a bright, shining light every time he appeared on screen. His combination of humor, sense of duty, and dignified honor made him the eye of the pyramid, both literally and figuratively. The often misunderstood wife of Walter White, Skylar White's motivations were the exact same as her husband's, with the only difference being that Skylar didn't choose to enter the underground criminal world in an attempt to achieve them. Skylar wanted nothing other than to do what was best for her family and to protect her family, which at the beginning of Breaking Bad included the impending arrival of an unexpected new member of the family. While baby Holly was waiting to be born, Skylar had to endure the terminal cancer diagnosis that her husband has been given, on top of the pre-existing pressures of having a son with special needs and a financial situation that doesn't scream stability. And while Skylar does in fact exhibit a great amount of sympathy for Walter in light of his diagnosis, as a human being, she could only be stretched so far. So when he started to disappear without warning while offering little to nothing in the way of a reasonable explanation, yeah, she started to act out a little. Having a husband who isn't at all forthcoming, with a baby on the way, quickly adds up to at least a perceived lack of support when it is needed most. So while Walter is certainly deserving of sympathy, he does have cancer, it is unquestionable that Skylar is equally deserving of sympathy as well. However, she never receives any. Not from Walter, not from her son, not from Marie, not from Hank. And when she finally discovers for certain the reason of all of Walter's erratic behavior, that he is in fact a criminal drug lord, all while a DEA agent is a prominent member of her family, she wants out of the marriage. This shouldn't surprise anyone. And while she agrees to assist Walter in his criminal activities, under the motivation of her protecting her family, she is loath to do so. And without the criminal wherewithal that Walt seems to naturally possess, and while suffering from the untold amount of pain that Walter has caused her, her only means at lashing out and getting back at him is to engage in an affair with Ted Beneke. While this is definitely not the right thing to do, it is certainly no worse than everything Walter has done. All of this is to say that while she didn't choose the life she wound up living, and without Walter's actions she wouldn't even be in the same stratosphere of where she wound up, she did make her choices and lived with them, knowing they would haunt her through her final days. She chose to have agency to the extent that she was able, and in that regard, she remained the admirable matriarch she was always meant to be. A dedicated and decorated DEA agent, a loving husband and father, Stephen Gomez, affectionately known as Gomi, was the right-hand man to Hank Schrader in all matters concerning the DEA, but especially in the Heisenberg case. His closeness to Hank made him the butt of several innocuous jokes, but he was certainly never afraid to punch back at his comrade in arms. That said, there is conflict between them, stemming from Hank's assignment to, then return from El Paso, where Gomez winds up going instead. When Hank is shot and hospitalized, Gomez makes his return, only to be chastised by Marie for not being there for his partner. When Hank becomes the ASAC, Gomez becomes his subordinate, and occasionally has to deal with Hank's mood swings and contradictory leadership. However, when the chips are down and the moment has arrived, Hank knows that Gomi is the only person he can turn to professionally. While Hank reveals the truth he has learned about Walter White being Heisenberg to Marie, he tells no one else in the DEA. No one, that is, except for Gomez. Working together with Jesse Pinkman, whose safety and welfare Gomi actually cares about in contrast to Hank's indifference, the three of them are able to draw Walter out to the site where his money is buried and move to arrest him. Unbeknownst to them, Walter has called in Jack Welker and his gang, drawing Gomez and Hank alone into a gunfight they never should have had to endure. Falling victim to sheer numbers, Gomez is unceremoniously killed. While many parallels can be drawn between Gomez and Hank, starting with the obvious fact that they're both DEA agents, Gomez has a different air about him. He wants to catch the bad guys too, and given the length of his career and the promotion he received in going to El Paso, he has certainly done so. But he has always comported himself in a manner befitting the Blue, finding no need to circumvent his superiors or engaging in unnecessarily dangerous activity. His qualities are voluminous, but they start with his loyalty and his reliability. If given the choice between having Hank Schrader or Stephen Gomez on the payroll, one would be well advised to select Gomez, who may not have the flash, pomp, and circumstance of his partner, but he does have the results-driven qualities that truly get the job done. While he wasn't Breaking Bad's first antagonist, Tuco was the series' first true villain. Descriptive words that generally come off as hyperbole, such as psychopath, maniac, or lunatic, don't seem to do enough to encapsulate Tuco. Our introduction to the Salamanca family and the deeper criminal drug underworld, Tuco is violent, at times irrational, and always seething with anger. He demonstrates his general insanity by showing respect to Walter for blowing up his office wherein he could have easily been killed. He reacts to Nodo speaking out of turn by literally beating him to death. Yet, there are two things that he understands with a degree of clarity. 1. Walt and Jesse have created an excellent product capable of high financial productivity. And 2. La familia es todo, as taught to him by his occasionally equally sadistic Uncle Hector. With these things in mind, Tuco plans to smuggle Walter and Jesse, along with Uncle Hector, into Mexico through his cousins Marco and Leonel, so that they can make buco bucks. Yet, one thing still gnaws away at him: Gonzo. Walt and Jesse know that Gonzo is dead, and they're under the impression that Tuco killed him. Yet, Tuco is under the belief that Gonzo has turned into a DEA informant, unaware that Gonzo is dead at all. He is truly hurt. He is emotional in a way that a normal human being can understand. For once, Tuco actually resembles a human being, despite his uncanny ability to go from perfectly calm to outrageously angry faster than a Ferrari can go from 0 to 30, let alone 0 to 60. And he punctuates it all with what is perhaps the best delivered line in the entire Gilliverse: you never trust the people that you love. for all of his faults, and he has plenty, Tuco is singularly captivating in a way that other characters in this show, or perhaps any other show, simply cannot match. He's psychotic, dangerous, and unpredictable, and while you'd never want to be alone in an alley with him, you'll take him on your television screen every day. Introduced early on in Breaking Bad's run, Wendy didn't appear to be anything more than a throwaway character, used for a singular purpose as Hank tried to scare Walter Jr. off of drug use that never actually took place. And while Jr. didn't need the lesson, Wendy in turn became an avatar for the audience that represented the world that Walter Sr. was indiscriminately dipping his toe into. If that's all that Wendy ever did, then she would retain some use as a character and had been memorable to perhaps the show's most hardcore fans. But oh, she gave us so much more. Wendy, it needs to be said, is a prostitute, working out of the Crossroads Hotel, nicknamed the Crystal Palace for appropriate reasons, that also doubles as her home. Without ever exploring her past, we can state with certainty that drug use has negatively affected her ability to gain what would otherwise be lawful employments. In the hands of an average writing staff, this would be a one-note character without any depth. In the hands of this writing staff, Wendy becomes an integral piece of the plot moving forward. Jesse knows his car has been found at the site where Hank Schrader gunned down Tuco Salamanca. Who does he turn to for an alibi? Wendy. And it's not simply for the convenience of reality that Jesse would happily spend an entire weekend partying with a prostitute in a hotel room, but because despite her exterior showing the wear and tear of her collective life decisions, Wendy remains tough as nails. It's borderline exhilarating to see her stand up to the heat that Schrader sent her way, to the point of calling him out for his previous visit to the palace with that football player. They get nothing out of her. Her alibi stands up, and while Jesse remains in Hank's crosshairs, he escapes this situation scot-free. Having built this trust, Jesse turns to Wendy again in his bid to exact revenge on the rival dealers. If not for Walt's intervention, she was certain to come through. Of course, before all of this ever happened, she was involved in the Kim and Jimmy grift against Howard, once again playing her role to perfection and earning the respect and possible future legal services of Kim. She even spots the car that was following Kim around. While she misidentifies it as a police car, her general intent is spot on. We don't get much of Wendy, but every bit of what we do get is a delight. There is a case to be made that she is the most real character on the show, maybe not in the professional or physical sense, but in the personal sense. And while it's safe to assume that the vast majority of the Gilliverse is not made up of drug-addicted prostitutes, we are able to relate to her, and relate to her well all the same. Oh, and she really, really likes her root beer. Seemingly an impossibly high placement on this countdown for a character with such limited appearances, it should be noted that it is due to these limited appearances that Old Joe just misses cracking the top 10. A veritable constitutional law expert, moonlighting as the owner of a junkyard, it's Old Joe who sweeps into the rescue when Walter and Jesse are, to that point, at their closest to being captured by Hank. The tension is at an all-time high when Hank arrives at Old Joe's junkyard, having correctly identified the RV christened by Jesse as the Crystal Ship, with not only Jesse inside, but Walter as well. All seems lost when Hank is attempting to break into the RV with a crowbar, until Joe enters the scene and asks if Hank has a warrant. At this point, the only thing Joe knows is that this RV was sent there to be destroyed. He knows nothing of its history, of its contents, or of its owners. Rather, he has a healthy sense of justice, and he puts Hank Schrader in his place by, it should be mentioned, correctly pointing out that the RV is a domicile, not subject to Hank's flimsy at best excuse of probable cause. As Joe educates Hank about the Constitution, specifically the Fourth Amendment as it relates to search and seizure, Jesse and Walter marvel at this turn of events from inside the RV. While Hank continues grasping at straws over the probable cause argument, Walter, inspired by Old Joe, is spurred into action, again allowing Joe to use the Fourth Amendment as a virtual fly swatter on Hank. Having been soundly defeated through his basic inability to either understand or apply basic civil rights, Old Joe makes Hank stand down. This scene presumably could have worked with any character, but its surprise lay in the fact that this seemingly benign junkyard owner, who might otherwise be expected to be your typical grunt, was an on-the-spot Saul Goodman stand-in for Walter and Jesse, and he did it with such aplomb and elegance to top it off. Old Joe comes back 2 more times, first to assist the Brain Trust in experimenting with their magnet plan, then again in El Camino where he offers his services to Jesse free of charge to get rid of Todd's car, for old time's sake and because he likes Jesse and thinks he deserves this one break. The impending arrival of the police precludes him from doing so, but the intent was certainly there. For all of this, nothing will top that first moment, for without him, Hank likely breaks into the RV and, well, the show would be over. Walt and Jesse probably don't go to jail for the ill-gotten manner that Hank used to get into the RV, but the jig would certainly be up. So, thanks to Old Joe, we got 36 more episodes beyond this one to enjoy. Long live our basic constitutional rights, and long live Old Joe. The introduction of Marie Schrader as a vainglorious, snooty figure was wondrous for her character. Very quietly and very indiscriminately, by the end of the Gilliverse, as seen in the final episode of Better Call Saul, Marie is the only character from the extended White Schrader family who ended in a better place than when she started. Now make no mistake, we're not referring to her lot in life. She has suffered greatly, having lost her husband and going months without having any idea what truly happened to him or where he even was. Moreover, her husband's death directly resulted from the actions taken by her brother-in-law, a man she loved as a brother, which in turn caused a rift between her and her sister. No, Marie is in a better place because of the changes she was forced to undergo based on the events that took place around her and her own personal journey of growth. The Marie of the pilot episode of Breaking Bad and the duration of the first season would not be capable of being the support system that Hank would need moving forward from his shootout with Tuco and everything else that followed. Marie's escapades and shoplifting have been spoken ill of by much of the fanbase, and unfairly so. It represents the instinct inside of her that all people have, the desire to leave our own skins and take on a new role. Walter White did it, and he never recovered from it. Hank had been doing it before being dragged back into reality. Skyler vacillated back and forth between it so much that she could no longer discern her own reality. But Marie shook it off, was willing to engage in therapy, and after finally having it out with Skyler and facing up to her own shortcomings, she was able to take that step into personal growth that so many people assume to be easy, but have extreme difficulty in actually doing. Thus, Marie became ready for the hailstorm that overtook Hank and was the perfect support that he needed, even if he was too stubborn to realize it. And yes, in the midst of all that, Marie backslid. She put her soul into Hank's recovery from his shootout with the cousins, and he virulently rejected her. Her sole personal purpose, at the expense of disregarding herself, wasn't so much being shattered, but painfully and rigorously chipped away at. Fault her if you must for exposing her humanity, yet praise her, if you will, for having the inner strength to continue maintaining that humanity in the darkest of times. For once again, she came out better on the other side, and from that point forward, through what would be the last time she and Hank needed a restoration, she never faltered. In fact, she demonstrated incredible grit during what might be the most heart-wrenching scene in the entire Gilliverse, outside of Walter and Skyler's knife fight. While sitting in Skyler's bedroom, shortly after learning the truth about all of Walter's activities, Marie slowly began to piece the timeline together as it pertained to Skyler's involvement. Left aghast at her discoveries, and left more aghast by Skyler's trifling attempt at an apology, Marie slapped Skyler right in the face, a slap that sent reverberations of equal parts horror and sadness through me. Moments later, baby Holly was in her hands. The old Marie runs off with her without a second thought. The new Marie knows she cannot do that, but she needed to elucidate the situation to Skyler in such a way that Skyler could come to understand the depth of her own depravity. Where Skylar chose to go with that was up to Skylar herself, and while she tried, she wasn't able to live up to Marie's example in her execution. And when all the chips were down, and Saul Goodman was set to be the one and only person to answer legally for all of Walt's actions, there was no more appropriate person than Marie Schrader to face him directly and encapsulate our collective feelings about all the misdeeds that befell everyone in Walter White's path. There is no Gilliverse without Marie Schrader. She is the glue that keeps the universe's panels together. The Gilliverse introduced a shockingly diverse cast of villains that all displayed a degree of humanity to differentiate them from what one may consider typicality. Then, we got to see a villain whose lack of humanity is so pervasive in his every action that he takes the concept of typicality and annihilates it beyond recognition. When describing Todd Alquist, Jesse refers to him as dead-eyed. Among life's more common aphorisms is that the eyes are the window to the soul. A dead-eyed monster, a soulless husk, who otherwise seamlessly fits into the society at large, is Todd to a T. He's not terrifying like Tuco because he's capable of violent outbursts. He's not terrifying like Juan Bolsa through his ruthless tact. He's not terrifying like the cousins for their utter disregard for life. He's terrifying for all of these reasons rolled into a single bundle. On the surface, Todd is the quiet boy who sits in the back of the classroom, pleasant in demeanor when engaged with, friendly and polite to a fault, a throwback to the gentlemanly ways of days gone by. He would be someone a mother would welcome into her home as a potential son-in-law, secure in the fact that this respectful young man would provide for and nourish her daughter in a spiritual manner. Albeit not to such a distinctive degree, this might be our first impression of Todd when he's introduced simply as an employee of Vominos Pest, serving at the behest of Walter and Jesse. He shows some initiative, disabling a nanny cam for them, and he clearly impresses them, enough that they bring him along for their train heist. Once they complete their heist, and they see that Drew Sharp has stumbled upon them, a quiet tension is built. Drew waves innocently at them. Walter and Jesse don't quite know what to do, but Todd does. He waves back. In that moment, all of our impressions of Todd are proven correct. Perhaps he even resembles Jesse in his care for children and his desire to protect them. Again, like Jesse, while he may be a criminal, deep down he's not a bad person. And, in a flash, all of those conjectures are wiped clean. Jesse is helpless to stop him, simply offering a halting no as Todd reaches behind himself, grabs his gun, and effortlessly shoots an innocent, nescient boy to his death, robbing him of the life that lay ahead of him, robbing his parents of their child, and leaving them completely in the dark about what may have happened to him, and robbing the very universe of its innocence. His response to all of this, to Jesse of all people, is that happens. And in El Camino, we learn that the tarantula Drew Sharp had on him was taken by Todd as a trophy, an act so disgusting it requires no further elucidation. And, as if to prove that this wasn't a one-off event, he applies an equal amount of barbarism when he kills Andrea in order to make a point to Jesse. His multifaceted wickedness coils up into a singular package that is astonishing to behold, serving as a testament to the evil that is capable of permeating the world if only others were so easily capable of separating themselves from their own souls. He is exemplary of the strongest possible form of ignominy, perhaps the purest, most terrifying form of evil. Yet, it is these unspeakable traits that make him a fascinating character, a cautionary tale of what happens when sadism fully penetrates one's heart, mind, and soul. Todd's death was perhaps the most satisfying of all of Breaking Bad, masterfully separated from the rest of the Welker gang, and when that's the case, you know you've got a great character. Although I suspect that many other characters fit this description, including but not limited to Old Joe and Lawson, Gale Boetticher is the only character in the Gilliverse who was avowedly, through his own self-description, a libertarian. He is classified as a criminal through the arbitrary nature of the law, but he is more so a capitalist who serves to meet the demand of a particular product by providing the best available supply. Gale is intelligent enough to know that people are free to make choices, particularly when those choices are restricted to what one may or may not do to his own body. And he likely realizes that there are destructive elements within society that are perfectly legal to produce and subsequently consume within a reasonable set of parameters designed to protect other people. Moreover, supplementing his engaging personality quirks and lifestyle choices, his one love above all else is the chemistry lab. It's where the magic happens, as he himself puts it, and he certainly ranks as a high-class magician. Yet, as good as he is, and producing a product with 90+% purity is something more than just good, he isn't so self-absorbed and can state with humility that Walter White is at an avant-garde level of magicianship. Personal glory does not drive Gale, only the pursuit of chemistry, and by extension the pursuit of purity. And herein lies the elemental bedrock of Gale Boetticher's character. He is, by all accounts, a good person. In his own words, consenting adults want what they want, and they will find their way to what they want, regardless of its legality or its quality. Whereas Gale cannot do anything about legality, he can certainly do his part over quality. And with Walter White by his side, that quality will be at its utmost. The difference between Gale and Walter is that Gale's ambitions do not lie outside of the lab whatsoever. He wants no part in, and likely could have no part in, the other goings-on of the drug business, which he rightfully believes would not exist but for the repressive hand of government in their all-consuming quest to moralize personal behavior. This is where Gale is transformed into a tragic character. Gale is Gus's chemist, and Gus is more than happy to proceed with this relationship as the Super Lab is officially open for business. But it is at Gale's insistence that Walter be brought in. Gale knows nothing of Walter at this point in time. He likely doesn't even know Walter's name. But as a servant of chemistry above all, he recognizes the immense quality of Walter's product. When Walter is brought on, thereafter losing his favor with Gus, Gale is brought into the game in a way he isn't suited for. Gus has drafted Gale as a soldier in his army, putting him directly on the front lines against Walter White, a man whose monstrosities have yet to be fully manifested, yet remains capable and desperate enough to self-preserve at all costs. Walter genuinely likes Gale and does not want to see harm come to him, but when placed as his opposition in a life or death matter, Walter holds no reservations about what he needs to do. Gale earned the right to live his life to his fullest, and that life bore its greatest fruit in his own version of nirvana, the chemistry lab. When Jesse Pinkman appears at his door on that fateful night, at the sole behest of Walter White, all he must do is knock on the door to gain the access that he needs. In his blissful ignorance, Gale allows him in, sealing his own fate. Here, we have a character who doesn't deserve to be placed in a position to take someone's life, taking the life of a character who doesn't deserve to die. It's all so cruel, and as Gale lies dead, a lamb led to slaughter, both the Gilliverse and the universe at large is wounded beyond repair. Breaking Bad fans who aren't a fan of How I Met Your Mother really ought to be. Bob Odenkirk, the actor who plays Saul Goodman, was unavailable to film the episode ABQ because of a prior commitment to How I Met Your Mother, but his part in the episode was absolutely necessary. So when that 1988 Chrysler Fifth Avenue pulls up in front of Jesse's apartment, and a man we've never seen before walks out and speaks his first words. Saul Goodman sent me. We have the birth of a character who was never truly intended to exist. The Fates work in mysterious ways, and this character, a medieval morality play wrapped up in one person, became among the most cherished and delineated characters of the entire Gilliverse. Among the major debates surrounding Mike Ehrmantraut is whether he is truly a good person. There is very little to debate here. Of course he is a good person. Also of little debate is that he does bad things in the name of being a good person. The real debate lies in the overarching question: do we lose our humanity? Do we lose our goodness? Do we lose ourselves when we engage in actions outside of our character for the sake of bringing other good into the world? It's the age-old question of whether or not it's okay to steal a loaf of bread if the intention is to feed your starving family. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mike Ehrmantraut, a loving, doting grandfather that can kill with ease, a corrupt cop who otherwise follows a strict moral guideline, a heartbroken father who lost his only son who tries to justify the same thing to another father through a chain-linked fence, an open book, yet a mystery. Mike gave us perhaps the best speech in the entire Gilliverse in the appropriately named Half Measures episode of Breaking Bad. While he was speaking about a specific situation in reference to another specific situation, they are truly words to live by. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention Mike Ehrmantraut's tour de force moment. That being every single second he appears on screen in the Better Call Saul episode 50, culminating with his gut-wrenching "I broke my boy" speech. At the Emmy Awards that year, when Peter Dinklage accepted the award for Best Supporting Actor in a Drama Series, he essentially admitted at the podium that the award really belonged to Jonathan Banks. Mike simply had a way of saying things that brought a greater weight to them than any other character in the Gilliverse could. His overwhelming presence, rooted in his innate gravitas, makes him a force to be reckoned with, both in the literal and in the figurative sense. While he certainly isn't the protagonist of either Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, no other character resembles Tony Soprano quite like Hector Salamanca. He is clearly a horrible human being, yet at times he comes off as sympathetic. Most television dramas would never even bother putting two villainous characters against one another the way Breaking Bad did with Gus Fring and Hector. They're always more inclined to make clear who the audience should be rooting for. But when Gus and Hector were in that nursing home, and Gus is prepared to finally kill Hector after so many years, having finally overseen the death of every other Salamanca, there are a few moments when Hector elicits a kind of sympathy that would otherwise have seemed impossible. This is the same man that shot Max right in the head, Gus's likely romantic partner, right in front of Gus. This is the man who dunked the head of his child nephew into water and left him there to potentially drown just to make a point. This is the man who co-founded and served as a high-ranking member of the Mexican cartel. Yet, there sits Hector, bound to his wheelchair with perhaps the worst of all fates, completely sound of mind, yet completely bereft of body, with Tyrus preparing a dose of lethal injection, while Gus verbally runs him down one last time. He looks so defeated. In fact, he looks sad. Then, after spending the entirety of Breaking Bad refusing to ever look at Gus, even as Gus eggs him on to do so, he finally does. Even Gus freezes for a moment, and in that moment, like so many moments we shared with Tony Soprano, Hector Salamanca is a babe in the woods, helpless, resigned to his fate, too cognizant to be oblivious. It looks like this old school Mexican gangbanger is gonna cry. It's just a moment though. The Hector we all know and love quickly reemerges, and knowing his time on Earth is likely limited to just about the next 10 to 15 seconds, he shoots Gus just about the most evil look anyone has ever given anybody. Very shortly thereafter, it's all over for everybody, and perhaps you're left wondering if you should have been rooting for Hector throughout this whole ordeal. That is powerful stuff. We can also sympathize with Hector one other way, just like we did with Tony Soprano, that being his endless love and dedication to family. We may, and probably should, quarrel with his methods, but when he speaks the words "La familia es todo," at least we can understand where he's coming from. He does love his family. His scenes with Lalo in Better Call Saul demonstrate this to no end. The fact that they're both murderous psychopaths can understandably deter from someone recognizing that, but the love is there. At the end of the day, he reared his family the way he saw fit, and in that regard, it's hard to see how he could have been more successful. But above all of this, the one thing that Hector does as a character that truly sets him apart is his ability to make the ringing of a bell terrifying. When Hector, Jesse, Walter, and Tuco are all in that shack, and Hector rings that bell, a demon may as well come crashing through the ground from the deepest levels of hell, because that is the feeling it engenders. I'm not kidding. Whenever I hear a bell ring anymore, whether it's an actual bell or perhaps the dinging of an elevator, for just a moment, I am frozen in my tracks. Hector Salamanca did that. From seemingly just another face in the corporate crowd, to one of the most indispensable characters in the entire Gilliverse, Kim Wexler's rise to prominence appears to be attached to the fate of another character, Jimmy McGill. However, this is not the case. Kim comes to power completely on her own. It's made evident early on that something exists between Kim and Jimmy. Left unclear is whether that's a past relationship, a current relationship, friends with benefit situation, anything like that. Whatever the scenario is though, an immediate air of mystery gets attached to Kim, and the audience is highly inclined to learn more about her. This is a character who had no hint of existence during Breaking Bad, yet here in Better Call Saul, she is a major character in Jimmy McGill's life. What happened to Kim had to be by far the most asked question, with by far the most theorized solutions during the course of Better Call Saul. The proverbial axe seemed to hang over her head at all times, reaching an absolute fever pitch from the episode Bad Choice Road and beyond. And for all the great moments that Kim had to that point, among them her wry smile at Jimmy's actions at the billboard while the rest of HHM fumed, to slipping into the skin of Giselle St. Clair for the first time, to confronting Howard over how he handled the sensitivity of Chuck's death to Jimmy, to fully embracing the con game with poor Shirley Hartland of the Lubbock, Texas Department of Building Safety, and everything involving Everett Acker, her magnum opus is in Bad Choice Road. At no point did our fear for Kim's safety and her life ever hit such a crescendo. With Lalo Salamanca in their apartment, swaggeringly displaying his gun, Jimmy's tongue for once tied up in knots with him desperate to get Kim out of the apartment, and Lalo's methodical yet maniacal attempts to both break Jimmy and break the situation wide open, it is Kim who slowly rises from the seated position that Lalo insisted she take, and she laid into him in such a way that just saying it out loud gives me the chills. Kim only knows so much about Lalo, but what she does know is enough to terrify her to the point where she would be loath to take an incorrect step in front of him, let alone say the wrong thing to him. But nope, this is Kim effing Wexler we're talking about here. She told him to get his house in order. She told him to get his together. She said things to him we as an audience wouldn't imagine that Juan Bolsa or even Don Eladio would say to him. And from all that fear and all that angst, Lalo simply walks away, defeated if just for a moment, bested by the Guerra, the situation diffused, Further punctuated early in the next episode where Mike told Jimmy that he knew enough that she saved his ass. Kim went through a boomerang character arc across Better Call Saul. While she isn't in the same place physically or even mentally at the conclusion of the series, how could anyone after the traumatic events she witnessed and been a part of, she is in the same place emotionally and spiritually. She didn't just stay nestled in one place the entire time, however. There is a lot of dynamism taking place. The hard-working, fully dedicated, warm-hearted Kim of the early episodes did indeed take a trek on Bad Choice Road. The small-time grifts and cons she and Jimmy pulled off were one thing, but what they did to Howard crossed the line. This would be true even if Howard didn't meet such a tragic end. But meet that end he did, and he did so right in front of her eyes. While she could never escape this, and she would be wise never to try, she does one thing that even Mike would say she couldn't do. She got off Bad Choice Road. She is made of sterner stuff. She was able to return from whence she came. It may be that she couldn't make the trip on her own, that she needed a tow truck to get her there, but it did happen. When she left Jimmy, she left fans with a perfect confluence of mixed emotions. They were sad to see a couple they loved fall apart, but they also felt an incredible sense of relief that Kim survived. She would live on and simply just not be part of his life anymore up through the events of Breaking Bad. So it was only appropriate that after leaving Albuquerque, she returned to cleanse the remaining part of her soul, and then served as the sole impetus for Jimmy to do the same. Jimmy didn't corrupt Kim, at least not permanently. Neither did Kim corrupt Jimmy. Kim was all at once her own, a character achievement of the highest order, riveting and absorbing beyond reproach. Lalo Salamanca ranks right up with Todd Alquist in that he is completely separated from any means of humanity while somehow being Todd's darker mirror. Indeed, Lalo is the extroverted version of Todd, exemplifying his dual nature for all to see. He is dashing, charismatic, charming. He seems to enjoy all of life's little pleasures, and he is always in an incredibly good mood. And let's face it, y'all, he is exceptionally handsome. He's not a wolf in sheep's clothing, as perfectly well as that would align with one of Better Call Saul's key conundrums. No, he is a devil in, the form of the world's tastiest chocolate cake. It's why Kim only had a brief encounter with him, and otherwise simply armed with the knowledge that he is cartel affiliated, is still terrified of the man, and we can be terrified for her. It's safe enough to say that Lalo is on a different level from what one may imagine a stereotypical villain to be within the confines of the Gilliverse. In fact, there are some predetermined notions one may carry solely based on the fact that his last name is Salamanca. But it might also be safe to say that Lalo is on a different level from what anyone may imagine a stereotypical villain to be in any given context. Like the rest of his cousins, Lalo was reared in the image of his uncle Hector, and to him, La Familia es todo. The lengths he will go to for his family is a fact we learn early on during his pursuit of Werner Ziegler. He is equal parts effortless in his ability to leap through ceiling tiles and emerge on the other side of a room, as he is to slaughter an innocent young man just to get information that might bring Gus into a negative light with the cartel. This dogged determination never abates, and he is able to get through certain situations in ways that may have one believing he is an actual superhero. The thing is, though, he makes it believable. His ability to survive the assassination attempt at his hacienda isn't something we simply accept as a plot contrivance. No, we believe he is capable of pulling off that feat and all of the smaller feats that led to it. Moreover, Gus believes it, as it's in the very next episode that Gus says that Lalo still lives. Notice, Gus does not suggest that Lalo might be alive. He doesn't state that there is some evidence to suggest that he might be alive. No, he states it as factually as one would state that Friday is the day after Thursday. Because, like Sun Tzu, Gus knows thine enemy, and that formerly unflappable persona begins to show cracks under the specter of Lalo's return. And what does Lalo do while in absentia from the world of the living? He continues the Werner Ziegler pursuit, going so far as to track down his widow in Germany to get whatever information he can. His Sherlock Holmes / Ted Bundy conglomeration is at times amusing to watch, and except for the fact that he is, again, legitimately terrifying in a way that other characters simply cannot approach, you would be forgiven if you found yourself rooting for him, or at the very least placing yourself in his shoes. And yet, he can still shock us. And on that fateful night, and in that fateful moment, where Lalo walks into Kim and Jimmy's apartment, while poor Howard Hamlin happens to be there, we know that Howard is in immediate and perhaps incontrovertible danger. As Howard is struggling to fully wrap his head around what's going on, Lalo casually screws the silencer onto his gun. We are fully aware of Lalo's capabilities here, but we are still drawn to the notion that maybe he's just engaging in a scare tactic. No, of course not. With the effort one may use to swat a flyaway while on a picnic, Lalo ends Howard's life and is able to bring us into shock despite everything in the lead up to that point making it obvious what the final outcome was going to be. This man with a siren's allure, lacking in humanity while simultaneously taking in the human experience with a gleeful fervor, is a showstopper extraordinaire, the likes of which only pass through as often as Halley's Comet. Siempre amigo del cartel. Yep, that's what I would tell anyone if I thought they were sent by Lalo Salamanca. Throughout Walter White's journey, there is one person in his life he truly looks up to and admires. It's not his brother-in-law, seen by so many as the virtuous DEA agent saving the world from all of its bad guys. It's not his former business partner, seen by so many as an immensely successful entrepreneur and equally generous philanthropist. No, it's Gustavo Fring, the unassuming head of a chain of fast food chicken restaurants, a man reduced to such monikers as Colonel Sanders and the Chicken Man, not just by those in polite society unaware of his secret empire, but also by those who know him best and know the exact nature of his business. Gus is the classic example of someone who should not be judged by his cover, but in classic Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul fashion, Gus inverts the trope as a book whose cover may include unicorns and rainbows, while his pages read death and destruction. This veneer is what brings his character so much intrigue. Our introduction to him, without yet knowing his name or knowing that he is the businessman / drug distribution wizard that Walter White is looking for, gives us an immediate hint of what really lies beneath him. There is no incoming swerve. We don't get to know Gus as the congenial man who gives to charity and serves as Albuquerque's most visible booster for the DEA before finding out his shocking secret. No, we get to know the secret first, yet he is still able to maintain his veneer with us. However, we do accept that he is not a Salamanca, not at all. He knows this. Juan Bolsa, Don Eladio, the Salamancas themselves know this. Gus would never erupt into a rage of violence as Tuco would. He would never go on to types of murderous rampages like the cousins would. While we knew he was capable of manipulating situations to his liking, such as turning the confrontation between the cousins and Hank into his own personal playground, and arranging for Juan Bolsa's murder, he had an air about him that told us he would never get his hands dirty himself. This veneer maintained its presence with us until he got his hands on a box cutter. When Gustavo Fring arrives at the Super Lab on the night Gail Bedecker was murdered, Breaking Bad as a show and Gustavo Fring as a character leapt into a different atmosphere. While Walter is incessantly speaking to this man that he admires and wishes to emulate, attempting to explain himself away so that he may stay in his good graces, Gus is the personification of grace under fire. He calmly, deliberately, almost elegantly walks down the stairs and across the room. We're not completely sure what he's up to, but after he painstakingly removes his business attire and puts on the equivalent of a hazmat suit and takes a box cutter into his hand, it would appear he may be about to engage in some violence. But nah, we don't accept that he will do that. He isn't going to kill Walter or Jesse on his own. Never mind the fact that he needs them, it's just not something Gus would do. It's just an intimidation tactic, that's all. And then, after what seems about 10 to 15 minutes of Walter's bloviating, only occasionally intercut with short responses from Victor, all go silent. Gus takes Victor, his loyal henchman, and does what he does with the box cutter. Even Mike has no earthly idea what to do in this moment, as he instinctively raises his gun at Gus with a look of bewilderment on his face that never once get close to being duplicated ever again. Walter's frantic mood is immediately put away, and for the first time since he started to really embrace his Heisenberg persona, he felt fear. And yet Gus never speaks a word. He lays Victor down, having brutally killed him, then goes back to calmly getting back into costume before re-entering the world. It is only at the foot of the doorway where he tells them to get back to work, having said everything else that needed saying beforehand without actual words. This was where Gustavo Fring leveled up to supervillain status. His cat and game mouse with both Walter and Lalo, his manipulation of Nacho, his murder of Arturo, and his ability to come across as a likable, enviable person to everyone around him are all topics for discussion and do much to accentuate his character. In these moments, he displays vulnerability, self-doubt, even fear, placing him in the 4th or 5th dimensional plane of character development. But if left with one lasting memory, one moment where it all congeals and explodes at once, this was it. Maybe he is more of a Salamanca than he thinks, except for one major difference. He is, quietly and unexpectedly of course, more terrifying than every last one of them. A flashback in the 3rd episode of Breaking Bad shows Walter and Gretchen attempting to determine the chemical composition of the human body. When they're unable to quite get to 100% and Walter is left flummoxed at these missing pieces, Gretchen somewhat casually suggests that they should consider the soul. Whatever her intention, Walter quickly dismisses this, saying that they're only here to deal with the science of it all. But left unsaid and heavily implied is that Walter dismisses more than just the suggestion, that he rejects the notion of a soul altogether. Thus, we seamlessly delineate the cause of Walter's overall treatment of Jesse Pinkman, because Jesse is without any semblance of doubt the soul of Breaking Bad and the entire Gilliverse. While Jesse the character remains a beloved figure in the community, Jesse the human being is not quite free from impunity. Walter outright eviscerates him on several occasions. He gets beaten up by Tuco, he really gets beaten up by Hank, and of course, there's the entire ordeal of his being kept prisoner and forced into literal slave labor for months by a white supremacist gang. And we know all of this. Many may also know that the writers and creators of the show initially saw Jesse as an expendable character, planning to kill him off in the first season as some sort of plot device for Walter, only for a real-life writer's strike to intervene and give them all the opportunity to rightfully reconsider. There have been other characters in this universe that are in the game and undertake criminal activity that are otherwise demonstrated to be at least decent people, if not all the way upstanding. Jesse stands head and shoulders above them all. We know a little bit about his home life and his early life. We know his parents aren't exactly fond of him, but we don't know if that has been the case all along. We know that Jesse's younger brother is essentially the apple of their eye as an academically high achiever, but given their age difference, we don't know if this was the case while Jesse still lived in the house. We know that he failed Mr. White's chemistry class, but we don't know the exact root cause of that failure. But Jesse's actions and his generally emotional state tell us what kind of person he must have always been. Therefore, we have to consider it a shame that he fell into drug use at was probably a fairly young age, before graduating to drug manufacturing and distribution. The fact that he may not be overly book smart should not be a dismissal of his overall intelligence. Walter hammers him often for his lack of chemistry knowledge, but he certainly never takes the time to educate him in the drug making process. Yet Jesse learns it, and he learns it very well, to the point that he is able to outclass cartel chemists. His capabilities outside the tedium of the high school curriculum are never properly nourished, which led him to the so-called burnout lifestyle he is depicted as having. Therefore, it makes some kind of cosmic sense that his former high school teacher was the one who, quite unintentionally, brings the best out of Jesse from an admittedly unorthodox pedagogical standpoint. Yet, through it all, and in the course of being forced into doing some terrible things, Jesse never loses his sense of self. He is steadfastly protective of children, and by extension, of the innocent. He has great love for those closest to him, consistently demonstrating loyalty that borders on fealty. He suffers through the loss of his two loves, Jane and Andrea, finding one dead and witnessing the other be killed, while living a life of degradation and privation so that he may protect Brock. He takes 5 lives, the first being Gale, which haunts him to no end, even though it was essentially done in a long form of self-defense, as were the killing of Joaquin Salamanca, Neil Candy, and Casey. Todd's a different story, of course, but who exactly was rooting for Todd in that scenario? He has so much taken from him, and in more ways than simply physically, yet no one is able to strip away his essence. Even when he technically/legally ceases from being Jesse Pinkman and is now Mr. Driscoll, he knows that he needs to deliver some kind of closure to Brock, who has now been without his mother for some time. It's not only appropriate, it's necessary that Jesse be the only main character on the criminal side of the Gilliverse not to get a definitive ending. We know there is so much more to him that it cannot possibly be contained within the walls of a storyline. He needs to move on. He needs to be the man he is intended to be. He is a good person. He is the moral center of the universe, the Gilliverse, and he is the missing pieces that Walter was looking for all those years ago. He is the soul of the show because his soul stays intact within him. As an often overlooked and certainly underpaid member of the service industry, Trent is a waiter at Gardunia's who first comes to our attention while Okay, I can't do this. Yeah, number 1 is Walter White. Who the hell else could it be? As you may have grown accustomed to the longer entries accompanying the higher ranked individuals on this list, this one will be relatively shorter. So much has already been said about Walter White, not only within the community at large, but just within this countdown. To put it simply, Walt is an everyman in 2 ways. The first is he has a sense of himself whose magnitude does not nearly approach his reality. Walter has a gigantic ego, a fact pointed out to him by Mike, but it's always been that way. It's not to say that every father who names his child after himself is some kind of egomaniac, but in Walter's case, that would appear to be true. He was the founding member of a literal billion-dollar company, but at age 50, he has to work part-time at a car wash in order to make ends meet for his family, doing a massive amount of damage to said ego that did just as much, if not more, to prompt his entry into the criminal underworld than his cancer diagnosis did. And of course is the bombshell revelation that he did not, indeed, do all that he did for his family. He told Skylar straight to her face he did it for himself, because he liked it, because he was good at it, and it made him feel alive. It is this ego that shapes him, and in turn, takes what could have been and maybe should have been an underdog story and instead makes him into a downtrodden doormat. We've all been there in some parts of our lives. The second thing that makes him an everyman is the fact that he does break bad, and in doing so displays a vicious wickedness that seems to have no bounds. This part of the human experience eludes a vast majority of all of us, but it speaks to that same potential residing in every single one of us. Evil is not necessarily a learned behavior. It can certainly be cultivated, but the ability for such cultivation comes from the fact that it is an irreparable part of our very nature, and that in order not to unleash it, we have to fight it. Walter White fought it for just over 50 years, until he didn't think it was worth fighting for anymore. When would such an epiphany happen to me? When would such an epiphany happen to anyone? When would such an epiphany happen to you? Walter White speaks to our basic desires, our yearning for more, our tendencies to accentuate dissatisfaction over gratitude. He is equally the most loved and hated, feared and respected, heroic and dishonorable, sympathetic and unforgivable character possibly in the history of television, and possibly even the entire encapsulation of literature. I am enthralled by him. I am wary of him. I learn from him. And of course, there is neither a show nor a Gilliverse without him. That was the list. Thank you so much for sticking through it all. I would love to hear what you think about it. Did I rate somebody too high? Too low? Did I leave anybody out? Did I have someone who didn't belong? Sound off in the comment section and let me know. Fans of Breaking Bad and the Gilliverse at large are among the best, so all opinions are certainly welcome. If you haven't already, please hit that like button, please hit that subscribe button, and if you have a moment, please take the time to share this video. This channel is still relatively new, but I do have some other fun videos if you're looking for something else to watch. Thank you again. I am Pete Makatis, and it was my pleasure to present this to you. And when the chips are down in life, may you be the one who knocks.